Hey there, everybody. It is Irene Lyon here. It is the 15th of October, 2020, and this is our monthly special topic, and I'm just making sure all systems are going here. Takes a second or two for people to pop on. But today the topic is going to be all about adrenal fatigue and burnout and their relationship to trauma, the nervous system, stored traumatic stress, dysregulation. I've got some notes here. I can see some people are popping on, so that's wonderful. So while I wait to make sure we're all going well, I think my sound is coming through. Hey Fiona, hey Miyoki, hey Elizabeth, hey Tracy, good morning. My comment section is over there. That's why I keep looking down. Hello from Italy. Yeah, let me know where you are. And yeah, we'll get started really soon. Quick note, if you are new to me, you might be watching this on Facebook. You might be watching this on YouTube because we take these videos and we put them up on YouTube after they're done, so they live indefinitely, hopefully. And what we're planning on doing, I'll give you a little insider knowledge. We're planning to start up a podcast soon. A podcast, so audio. A lot of people have been wanting this content to go into audio so that you can download it onto your phone or whatever you use, and then you can listen without being connected to the internet, which I know is a beneficial thing to have. So you might be listening to this on my podcast, which will be hopefully unveiling in the next couple of months, if not within the next month. So wanted to let you know about that. The other thing, of course, if you're new here, I am Irene Lyon. And I do these monthly lectures on various topics. We did one not too long ago on healthy aggression and anger. We're obviously going to do one in November. And one thing to know, because a lot of people don't know this, I do more than just these educational videos here on YouTube, Facebook, etc. There are programs that I run and teach. Thousands of people from over 70 countries worldwide have gone through them. At the end, I will definitely be guiding you all towards those if you want to do more work with me and get into the practical. And the reason why I cannot teach the practical to the extent that I do in the programs is because it is very complex stuff. This isn't a 12-step formula. It's not a 3-step formula, even though I will be talking about a few steps today. You're doing one of them by getting education on board, but the practice is important. It is all about getting into this body of yours, the somatic system, and I'm going to be talking about why getting into the somatic system and learning to feel something that's called our interoception. I'm going to say that one more time. Why being connected to something called our interoception, which is the perception of our internal environment, becoming a master at that, why that is so important in relationship to not only adrenal fatigue and burnout and the healing of it, but all the other things that trickle out from that. So the other thing, Crystal, my amazing assistant, is here live putting in links. So again, if you're hearing this after the fact, somewhere near the video or the audio will be links to all these things. So she's just landed a few of the courses in the chat, in the comments, so be sure to check those out. And let's see, what are some other things coming in here? Hello from Romania. I'm not going to start with questions right off the bat. So Crystal, if you want to capture some of those questions, you could send them to me via my text feed, my WhatsApp feed, and then I won't lose them. I will try to do some questions. So let's get started, shall we? We've got about 48 people here. I'm going to show you, let's see here, got props today, you guys. All right, I actually posted this quite a while ago, and I posted it again last night. Let's see if my camera here is here. It's a quote. I will read it out in a second. This is something from one of my main mentors, Kain, who has taught me, I don't want to say everything I know about working with adrenals and healing them, but she's probably taught me most of what I know that is practical and is how these little suckers and the kidneys that go with them work. So what she says in this quote, and I'm quoting her, she says, without first addressing the underlying survival physiology, I'll explain what all these are in a second. So without first addressing the underlying survival physiology, any change in behavior is simply overriding through force of will. Okay, so what that basically means, let's do some quick nervous system 101. We have got our autonomic nervous system, and that system governs two things. One thing is our survival responses, the fight, flight, as she's saying here, our survival physiology. So if I am under a massive amount of, let's say, attack from something, or I'm in an accident, or I see something coming at me and I need to jump out of the way, that kind of classic fight, flight scenario, the autonomic nervous system makes that happen. You don't have to think about it. Right? It's kind of like you're put into a stressful situation, your heart starts to pound a little bit. Even right now, my heart is pounding a little more than it was a few seconds ago because I'm a little more on, I'm making sure all these things are working. So while it isn't high stress, there's a little bit more survival energy in my system, even though my brain is still functioning. I see all my papers, I can see there's 66 people here, I see the feed. And this is important because we want to know that we can have survival come into our system, stress chemicals, but to not let it hijack us from coming down. If I was to stay ramped up in the kind of flush of energy when I start these calls, and if I don't regulate, ground, come back down, kind of just to where I am, it is weird connecting to people where I can't see you. I'm assuming you're there. I'm assuming you're paying attention. I'm sure some of you are, I'm on the background. It doesn't matter. But there's a weird interface here. So I am regulating my physiology, even though there's a little bit more pepper in my system right now, so to speak. So that was a bit of a segue to say our autonomic nervous system governs the fight, flight. It also governs something called the freeze response. I know this is review for a lot of you, but for those of you who are new, freeze is basically one of the third options when we realize that our fighting, our protecting, maybe our boundaries putting up or fleeing, trying to de-escalate a situation, when we realize there's no way I'm getting out of this, we go into a shutdown response, right? We go into a shutdown response that has variations. A strong high-level shutdown response would be something like fainting. So let's just say I came online today and I started to feel a lot of stress for whatever reason, and I felt my blood pressure rise up, and then it hits this switch that says, no bueno, no more, and I faint. That's never happened, probably will never happen, but for some folks, when they get into really high stressful situations, we see this a lot with people who see things that aren't nice. When people have their blood drawn, for example, it puts them into a bit of a sympathetic fight, flight, and then if they pass out, it's a freeze response. The system shuts down. The other thing that's really interesting is that we can also shut down and go into a freeze response in a more functional way. And I'm going to say functional with air quotes. Functional basically means it's serving the purpose so that we don't get into more trouble and that we stay quote unquote safe. However, if we're not aware that we're going into this functional freeze response, that can plague us and follow us indefinitely until we die. Hate to sound morbid, but that's kind of how it works. And so this work that I teach, that my students are here with me learning, I see a few of my alumni here, they know, and I know, and I'm teaching you now this, if you're new, this stuff doesn't heal with time. Our systems are too complex for it to take over because our higher brain has overridden a lot of our survival responses due to culture, conditioning, etc. I'll get into that in a second. So this is a long intro to give you one definition, which is one of the functions, I should say, of the autonomic nervous system is to go into these fight, flight, freeze responses when our system unconsciously realizes, I can't get out of here, so I better do something to preserve and protect my sanity, but also the intensities that I don't know how to feel. So that's one thing. So if you're taking notes, maybe make a circle, one reason or one cause or one function, I should say, of the autonomic nervous system: fight, flight, freeze, protection. It's automatic, autonomic, boom. The other function, and this is important for our conversations around adrenal fatigue, burnout, and the usually inevitable chronic illnesses that come out once we are embedded in that fight, flight, freeze physiology for a long time. The autonomic nervous system governs our digestion. It governs everything: immune system, endocrine, which is hormonal health, our cardiovascular function. It governs our reproductive organs. It governs the ability for fluids in our body to move properly, like the lymphatic. It's responsible for good flow, health, housekeeping, repair, regeneration of our cellular structure, which of course goes out into all of the organs and how the organ systems work, etc. Okay, one more thing that the autonomic nervous system has responsibility towards: it's our ability to socially engage. This is a more advanced level when we look at autonomic nervous system physiology. Mammals have this ability. Us humans, let's say our house cat, we can look at our house cats or our domesticated dogs and kind of turn our head and smile at them and make funny faces, and they look at us. And that engagement is also baked into this autonomic nervous system. It's part of the parasympathetic. Okay, that's as much as I'm going to go into a review of the autonomic nervous system. If you want a deeper dive, I did a simple but comprehensive video a little while ago on the branches of the autonomic nervous system. We'll pop it up. It was one of my trauma tip videos. So check that out. And of course, I get into this stuff way deeper in my program. So we've got these systems. And if I go back to this quote that I read here from Kathy about the underlying survival physiology, if we don't address these fight, flight, freeze responses and how they hijack us from feeling our internal body, from feeling when our system goes into a stress response, if we don't work at this level, we can do a lot of great things to try to improve our well-being through behavior change. Let's say eating well, having good routines, good self-care. And I'm all for, trust me, really good self-care, eating well, exercising, good people around us, having some kind of routine that keeps us in check so that we're constantly regenerating and rejuvenating our bodies, our tissues, etc. I'm all for behaviors that are really, really positive and good. I am no saint, but I follow my practices fairly carefully because I know that my system needs them. I hope you do too, or if you're not, you are interested in that. However, there's one caveat to that. If I do all the good things, eat all the good food, have all the good routines, all the good ritual practices, all the things that kind of our self-help, self-care, we could say coaching, health industry, nutrition industry has given us, which are all important. I really have to contextualize that. They're very important. If we are doing those without addressing the autonomic nervous system and its cries for help and its stress and how it is working or worked for us to keep us safe, if we don't address that stuff, because that is unconscious, it is at that deeper physiological level, we can be doing all those practices, but we could still be pumping out tons of stress chemical, namely, and these aren't all of them, but adrenaline and cortisol. We can still be in a hypervigilant state, feeling unsafe in our environment, even if we're in our own home, knowing that our partner, and I mean this, is loving and caring. We have good friends, we have good family, there is no danger around us, but if our past wiring of our autonomic nervous system is still thinking, and I say thinking with air quotes, because it's not a thought, it is an internal cellular feeling, the world is dangerous, and I can't trust it. If that is still living in the autonomic system, the behaviors will get us so far, but it'll become exhausting because we're constantly trying to basically put a band-aid on something and the cut just hasn't been addressed. It's not healing, if I use that kind of metaphor. So wanted to just start with that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this quote to the side. Again, that was from one of my mentors, Kain. Meaning we need to work at the physiology. Now I'm going to give you another thing that I actually thought of last night. I wrote it down, so I'm just going to read it verbatim. I see all your comments coming through. Let me just check to see if anything is applicable to what I've just talked about. Fiona says, I wonder if your heart gets a little stronger through the joining of all these nervous systems into a collective. I think you maybe mean my heart beating a bit more up. Without a doubt. I mean, there's 93 people here. If all of you were in my living room right now, and it's not a very big living room, we would be packed. And so part of the benefit and kind of what occurs when we become connected to our internal systems and we become regulated, and our brain and all of our organs aren't running at half mast on survival stress, when that is not running the front of the bus, as a human being, as a human soul, because I believe in our souls, we are able to tap into different parts of what's around us in a much more efficient and easy way. So I can sense and feel those energies, and it bombards my system a little bit. I'm not going to protect myself and shield myself, because that's going to shut me down and not give me the intuition and the way that I might zig and zag as I do this conversation and this talk. I don't want to protect myself and shield myself from that energy, but I have to be aware that it's there, and then I have to be able to ground that, move it out, and stay in my higher brain and keep teaching. Okay, I'm going to get to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. And again, for those of you joining live and you're popping on, I'm talking about adrenal fatigue and burnout and its relationship to nervous system health, trauma, etc. I'm going to define a few things in a second, but I wrote this last night. And I wanted to read it as a visual to start to understand how these fight, flight, freeze responses play out. All right, this is what I wrote. So imagine holding a cage full of tigers indefinitely, like a cage of tigers or a bunch of tigers in a cage. We could say this is kind of what a zoo is, you know, some of those terrible zoos where they're literally in cages. But imagine if you had a bunch of tigers, or any wild animal really, it doesn't have to be tigers, but they're kind of, you know, the ones that we think of when we think of the wild, at least that's for me. And you have them in that cage, and they would be pissed and angry for the start, releasing lots of adrenaline and stress chemicals, right? They'd be bringing out adrenaline, cortisol. They'd be stressed, they'd be worried, not knowing what's going on. But with time, even with a wild animal, soon they realize there is no hope, and slowly they acquiesce and shut down. They become depressed. It is at this moment when the system's capacity to fight, stay vibrant and healthy is lost. So if we think about an animal locked in a cage and not understanding what's going on, because they won't understand what's going on, they will whine, they will fight, they will try to get out, they'll hiss, they'll do whatever they can. But when they realize this isn't working, I'm not getting out, they're going to go into that shutdown, into that freeze response. And I actually, some of you know this, some of you don't. I grew up, both my parents were veterinarians, they're retired now. And so there was a small animal hospital that I spent pretty much all of my time in when I wasn't in school and even on the weekends. And you know, some animals would come in, and of course they would have to go in a kennel while they were waiting for their surgeries or whatever it was they were doing. Some of them would bark and meow and get really rambunctious. You could see that fight flight. And some of them didn't have that demeanor. They would just be a little more calm. They would be, and you could tell they were really, really afraid, but their default was to shut down. And it was interesting to kind of grow up in that and see the varying degrees of how different animals respond to being caged. Now, of course, they're domesticated, so it also depends on how regulated they are because of their owner's regulation, and that's a whole other story. I could talk for hours about the things I saw with animals and their owners, but we won't get into that today. So I'm using this example because while this is a wild example, animal example, humans, us, we are in our own cultural cages. And I've talked about this before. I did a video a little while on this. But our inability to get out our fight, to flee a situation that isn't healthy, and then how we might freeze when we realize we can't get out, that puts strain on our entire physiology and specifically our adrenals. And our adrenals are two little glands that sit on top of each kidney. Look it up on the online to see it if you want to get a visual. That adrenal gland is pumping out chemicals, pumping out, I can't get out, I can't get out, how can I get out? And what'll happen is over time, that animal, that human, it will wear out those chemicals because there's no rest. They're constantly in that state. And so a common thing, I'm going to shift over to humans now, when we are going, and we're not connected to this body of ours due to, let's say, not being connected when we were young because we weren't allowed to feel ourselves and be with our bodies and express our emotions. I'm not going to get into functional freeze. A little homework if you want to go a little deeper. A video I did a little while ago on functional freeze. Check that out. Functional freeze explained is what it is. When we are not able to, when we're young, to speak up, if we aren't safe because the environment is unsafe, maybe mom, dad hate each other, maybe there was abuse, maybe our parents were sick and not well, maybe they were abusing drugs or alcohol, maybe we were left alone because they were working so much trying to make ends meet and we didn't have that connection. All of the myriad of things. Maybe we had a lot of surgeries when we were young, right? Maybe we were born premature. So many reasons we can get trapped when we're young in a survival response, which then shuts us down from our body. We stop feeling our body. We then, because of our higher brain, our intense, amazing higher human brain, we can push, and to go back to Kathy's thing here, override through force of will. Because as human beings, our force of will is damn strong, and it's gotten us through a lot. Talk to anyone who's been through massive war, for example, right? We have strong will to go forward and survive, but that will, if it's overriding what's happening in our body, we're not going to know that the system is running a mile a minute because we're shut down. The shutdown response does not mean that the adrenals and the fight flight isn't running underneath that. Usually though, what happens is we're pumping out these chemicals, we're going. We maybe notice, and I'm going to just put some of the symptoms down here, we notice that we can't sleep. We notice that our digestion's going off. We notice that we're just not wanting to connect with people, or when we do, we're really irritable. We don't have the patience to work through a book or focus on something. Our brain is constantly being hijacked by other things. It's almost like an ADD, an adrenal ADD, so to speak. We're just not regulated. Now, hold that thought. If we had that early adversity and that stress where we weren't safe, chances are we didn't have that regulation from the beginning. Therefore, we go through life just thinking that living in that state of survival is the way it is. And that's where we have to have a little bit of an awakening and go, oh, you mean I'm not supposed to constantly control every aspect of my life? You mean I'm supposed to, not set boundaries, keep pushing, like that's just what I'm supposed to do. So when we get into this go of the adrenalized response to all the things happening in life, the system starts to break down. And the reason why it breaks down is because we don't get the deep restorative rest, digest, rest, sleep, right? And so people will often realize, something's not happening. I'm not sleeping as well. I'm waking up feeling foggy and more fatigued, even though I've slept for 12 hours. That shows me, at least when I'm working with folks, that the sleep they're getting isn't going into the good gear of the nervous system that repairs and regenerates and immune enhances the cells. So this adrenal fatigue thing, it isn't just something that happens in 1 week. It's usually happening low level, slowly, over time. Now, there are some instances where, let's just say, someone actually had good wiring. I always like to give kind of the other side of this, or a different scenario. Let's just say someone did have really good wiring and they actually did have safety and they weren't brought up in fight, flight, freeze energy their childhood years and teenage years. But let's just say an event happens in their life that is really disastrous, not to them, but something around them. Or maybe they have a really big accident and it really throws them off and everything comes tumbling down. A person can definitely go into a burnout, fatigued situation like that. But usually if that person starts to come back to normal life and starts to recover, they will recover a little quicker just because they had that foundation from the beginning. But it doesn't mean that a person can't wear themselves out, even if they had really good roots from the beginning. Okay, next thing. So I kind of call these 2 stages, and I wrote a very long article on this that you can use after this for review and reference that gets into more detail. But it doesn't make sense for me to say every single thing that's on that article. So if you want to check that out, it's called The 2 Little Known Stages of Adrenal Fatigue. We'll pop it also below in the links. So the first is this go, go, go. It's that tiger, right, from what I read on this thing, or the group of tigers locked in the cage. They're trying to fight. They're trying to get out. But then what happens is the system, it kind of runs out of gas, so to speak. The adrenals can literally become shriveled up. It's like, and it's hard to see this because we don't see the internal parts of our bodies, but let's just say, I know we've all probably seen images of lungs that have been decimated by, say, heavy cigarette smoke, or some kind of pulmonary disease like tuberculosis, and the tissue is just, it's necrotic and it doesn't look good. It's not healthy. It's not pink. You know, if I go back to the dogs and cats that I would see, the first thing that you looked to assess the health of an animal is you look at their gums. You make sure that they're plump and pink and there's lots of blood running through those gums. It's a sign of really good circulation. Same with humans. So if we think about the adrenals, when they have been punched down with so much overriding, they're pumping, their secretions are wearing them out. It's like exercising 24/7 and never having a moment to recover, right? And if we think about exercise, we actually break ourselves down, especially with intensity training. When we're doing the exercise, it's the recovery that strengthens the muscle. It's not the actual exercise, it's the recovery that strengthens the muscle. So what's interesting is the adrenals are, they're strong little suckers. They can pump and pump for decades and decades, but then there comes a point where they can't work anymore. And this is where we might see someone in their 40s, someone in their 50s, and sadly we're starting to see this more younger now, where kids are falling, they're coming down with chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, irritable bowel problems, Crohn's, immune system malfunctions, cancers, heart disease. I mean, not to be depressing, but that function, high-level function override, the cortisol, the chemical cortisol, wears out the tissues. It is toxic to the cells when there is a lot of it. A little bit of it we need, but if it's constantly there, it's like we're bathing the system in this toxic steroidal chemical. And so we need to give the system time to rest. But let's just say again, go, go, go person, and then all of a sudden there's a crash. And usually, and again I'm generalizing, but usually with that crash, there was the starting of some kind of physical ailment. whether it's pain, digestion, immune-related, etc. And if we go back to the very beginning of this talk, remember I broke down the two functions, main functions of the autonomic nervous system. If you can recall, one of them was fight, flight, freeze, so protecting us from threat and danger. The other one, can you remember? It's our autonomic physiological systems, like our digestion, like our immune system, like our reproductive system, our circulatory system, all of that stuff. So when that nervous system, when the adrenals have been hijacked by this go, 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 in the process of that happening, there's this low level kind of non-repair. There isn't enough regeneration happening. And a person might not show the signs and symptoms on the outside, but it's building. You know, we always talk about layers of an onion peeling off as we get deeper into our healing work. It's like we're adding the layers on, meaning we're not recovering and recouping. And slowly over time, that adds up. And if we're not doing anything to work with the stress chemicals and, of course, these mechanisms that are embedded in us, that's where we pop out a chronic illness. Again, I go into that a little deeper in these articles, but I wanted to just give that overview. All right, I'm going to head to the comments in a second, and just make sure that I have my notes here and I'm gone through some of the basics. All right, let's see. Okay, I'm going to wait to get to some of those questions because they're a bit more specific. So, of course, one of the things that you're probably wondering is how do we heal it and when? One of the questions is here. So for me, the healing of this is not going to be that 12-step list, eat these foods, have those supplements. That's not how I work necessarily. I will say a few things though regarding diet and exercise and lifestyle. We do need to focus on them. And I'm going to speak to something that I call, and I've learned this through Dr. Norman Doidge, it's called the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing. I add often a little bit more onto this, which is the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing sequencing. So neuroplastic healing sequencing. What this means is we have to start with the foundations. We have to start with building. If we build a house, again, I've used this example before, if we're building a house, we're not going to start with painting the walls. We're probably not going to want to start with building or buying furniture or light fixtures. We need to start with a plan. We need to start with understanding what it takes to build a house. We need the blueprints, we need the foundation, we need the builders, we need the architects, then we need all the things that happen to build a house. So think of the healing of adrenal fatigue and burnout like this. And the reason why I state it that way is because these elements are important so that we are, going back to what Kathy Kain said when I read that quote, they are helping to form the foundations so that the survival stresses can start to disarm, so that we can start to feel them and notice them. And this is not something that we can do in one moment. So the first thing to understand about neuroplastic healing sequencing is we want to make sure that our environment, we would call it, I call it housekeeping when I teach this. I do have an article, or I should say an ebook on this. You can check it out for more detail. I know there's a lot of information here and extra resources, but it is a good ebook that breaks this down. But simply, we want to make sure that our housekeeping is in order for our body. So that would mean no toxins in our environment, making sure we're eating well, making sure when we are sleeping it is as good as it can be, making sure we're getting fresh air, fresh food, movement, positive relationships, moving away from toxic relationships, because we have to understand, again, a side effect or a byproduct or a fallout, however you want to call it, of growing up in a toxic environment and with an environment that isn't safe is our system only knows that. And so we become magnets for toxic relationships and situations that constantly put us into states of danger, whether it's energetic, emotional, physical, environmental. The world and the human system is weird that way. So if we had that in our imprints and we haven't woken up to maybe the toxicity and maybe the lack of real unconditional love, attunement, attachment, when we start to realize, oh man, there wasn't a lot, I mean, there was goodness, but there was also a lot of conditions. That's how we see ourselves in the world. And so I say this because I've seen in the thousands, hundreds of people I've worked with through courses and in person and in workshops, we can do a lot of the good nervous system work, and we can do a lot of the good healing work when it comes to changing our diet and getting rid of all the stuff in our home that might be, chemical that we don't want to be ingesting and inhaling. But if the rubric in how we interrelate with others and how our system relates with other individuals hasn't been addressed, we might not even know that we're going into or we are living in a survival stress with our family members, whoever it might be, because it's just what we've been wired to feel. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if that makes sense, because this is one of the trickier ones, and I've seen a lot of people try to do really good work, and then it often falters because they don't see that relationship, for example, usually it's a marriage, unfortunately, but that's how it works, that marriage is actually playing out over and over again, the abusive, toxic, emotionally dependent, however you want to call it, world that created the burnout that we're trying to heal, or that created the chronic illness that we're trying to heal. And the thing is once we start to get into these pieces in our body, it's kind of like you cross over the other side, it's really hard to go back because we've awoken, so to speak. I mean, some people would call this taking the red pill. If we think of the movie The Matrix, we have woken up to this other possibility, this other world, our body, and all the intense energies that we've held. But if we've got that person or that group of people or whatever it might be that's trapping us, it's going to be hard to fully break through and find that true deep regulation and healing. So the first thing I wanted to say about, again, reminding you, we're talking about the sequencing of neuroplastic healing, the sequencing of healing adrenal fatigue, burnout, and then the usual chronic illnesses that come out from that. I'm not saying it always happens, but usually they connect, is making sure that we do the housekeeping. Housekeeping, I mean that, more metaphorically. And someone said, thanks, Elizabeth, it makes sense. It's my dysfunctional family you're speaking of. And again, someone says, yes, that makes sense. And here's the weird thing. There are some, I'm not a biologist, but I know there's some animals in the wild, they're born into the world and they stay in a pact, Some are born into the world, I think about bears, and once that cub is old enough to fend for itself and live, it's off on its own. Rarely do they stay together. The thing with animals in the wild compared to humans, and I think it's not right when we completely compare, but animals in the wild, they don't have culture. They don't have religion, they don't have expectations, they don't have school grades, they don't have punishments and the ways that we have imposed upon our human system. And so I've said this before, but a bear being born here in Canada, a bear cub is going to be treated and nurtured the same way a bear cub is treated and nurtured in, say, Russia, right? They're going to get the same imprint of mama bear, connection, food, protection, defense from predators, teaching how to fish, if it's a grizzly, teaching how to forage, all of that. It's very, very similar. It's identical. Humans, not identical. And so when we have been brought up in these early situations that are not honoring our human needs, I'll get into this in a second, our biology, our biological, our physiological needs, when we're given conditions for how we can feel our emotions, for how we can express maybe our fight, flight if we're hurt. Again, this goes into the functional freeze video that I mentioned. It's a really important one, so be sure to watch it. We're not equal in how we are raised humanly. And so when we have a partner or we have a friend or we have a group of people, there might be conflict if those people haven't started to wake up to this deeper desire to heal at this nervous system level. There's going to be a little friction. There's going to be a little bit of a dance between them not seeing it and not feeling it and us wanting to. And again, I've seen relationships blossom and strengthen because people have done this work together. And maybe one partner is a little more of a head than the other, and they catch on. And then I've also seen relationships separate and end because the one person who's doing the work is seeing that it's just not shifting in that connection with their usually significant other. So this work is more not just about steps and working with the body, it's also knowing how our environment is influencing us. Okay, someone just wrote here, Nicole says, I understand completely. Last year, no contact with my family, and the isolation has put me back into that same feeling. It seems paradoxical. You're right, and this is the thing, is we have to be able to realize I am going to, again, this is just hypothetical, I'm going to disconnect from this toxic family, and we need to make sure that we are adding something, adding some other element of support to our world so that we are not isolated and we're not alone. And how that happens will have to be individual for each person depending on where they are, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes we have to split up and break up from our family systems. I've seen people who have done amazing healing work and their lives are back on track, and then they're just smacked down by their mother or their father or their siblings because they're not aligning with how that family has seen them as maybe someone who's been sick or someone who's been not able to be strong. And we see this. We see family systems will tear down other people in the family so that they stay in the place that's comfortable and familiar. And if anything I've learned in doing this work for 20 plus years, learning and healing is not always comfortable and familiar. We have to push the boundaries a little bit. But usually if we can push them and work towards them, the right people start to show up. And we have to keep doing it. We have to keep doing it. We have to keep having faith and hope that those people will come in as we get more vibrant, as we get more connected to ourselves, we get more connected to the outside world. So next thing I wanted to say, so that was the first stage of neuroplastic healing, the kind of housekeeping. Now the other stages are, I'm going to just name them. One is called neuromodulation, one is called neurorelaxation, and one is called neurostimulation and neurodifferentiation. I know I just said a bunch of words. Again, it's on that ebook on the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing. The two, I'm going to say, that are super important in dealing with adrenal fatigue and burnout. The first one, neuromodulation, and the second one, neurorelaxation. Now, because I've named them one after the other does not mean that one is more important than the other. Human language makes it so that I have to tell you it that way. Can't yet psychically, holographically transmit it through this camera into your computer through the Ethernet and waves. But know that because I've said them, it doesn't mean one is better or first, but they're kind of happening at the same time. Neuromodulation means that we are learning how to be with that stress chemistry I told you about that we are not connected to. It might mean learning how to ride the wave of feeling and anxiety, which is really just fight-flight energy in the physiology. That's what anxiety is. I've done some videos on what anxiety is. Be sure to check those out. We'll post one of them below here. And so this ability to listen and start to connect to our physiology is so important. I heard Peter Levine actually say something just last week. I was in a class with him online, and he said, and hopefully I'll get this right, that if we do not learn how to be with our interoception. So if we are not able to be with our internal environment, he said we will not heal. We were talking about syndromes. Syndromes are the cluster of disease illnesses that we would classify as a result of autonomic dysregulation. So fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, autoimmune, chronic depression, chronic severe anxiety, severe PMS, migraine headache, all the elements of autoimmunity that are so rampant in our world today. So he said, we will not be able to heal these things if we do not connect and get really good with our interoception. And again, I know this to be true from seeing it in my work with my clients. So one of the ways that we can start to connect with this is to start to have more biological awareness. And I've spoken about this. Most of my videos, I touch into this, but can we listen to our digestion? Can we feel our stomach gurgle? When we have to go to the bathroom, are we able to feel the pressure in our bladder or in the rectum? Are we holding it in, or are we allowing our system what it needs when it signals to us? We've been taught culturally so damn much to hold things in. And I know often we think about emotions like anger and sadness and joy and all those things, but I like to go one step further into the physiology and be like, how often do we need to go to the bathroom and we hold it in? How often do we need to pass gas? And we do reluctantly, or we excuse ourselves, or we're shunned, or we're ridiculed when we're little for passing gas. That's not polite. Say, excuse me, leave the table. I mean, it's just a mess what we have done to cage our biology as a result of societal decencies and our culture and all the things that go with it. So as simple as it sounds, one of the first things I always teach my folks, and I'm telling you right now, start to listen to those impulses, those biological impulses in the system. When you're thirsty, speaking of which, I better have some tea because I realized right now that my throat is dry from talking. When we're thirsty, are we drinking water? When we're hungry, are we eating? Are we eating when we're not hungry? I know this is a big issue with so many people. Our hunger cues get so mucked up due to feeding schedules when we were young. Not being breastfed and being given a bottle. Nothing wrong with formula if that is what has to happen to nourish a child, but it doesn't have the same natural impact of the little one stopping when they're full, as opposed to you have to finish this whole bottle, that kind of thing. So one of the first steps in healing adrenal fatigue, these syndromes, and I like to cluster this, just dysregulation that's creating havoc on the system. So first thing I mentioned, the housekeeping element. Education is so important. That's why you're here, and I encourage you to learn more even after today. And then the next thing is connecting to the biology, connecting to this system of ours that we've probably been ignoring, or we've been dissociated from. That's a hot word right now, dissociation. Dissociation can be cognitive, where we blank out and we're like, what was I just thinking? Where did I put my keys? Right? Real simple, basic stuff like that that happens to everyone, especially when we're more tired. But then there's this somatic dissociation. And here's where it gets a bit tricky. If we have been somatically dissociated and disconnected and disembodied from our body since maybe we were infants, because let's say maybe we were left to cry ourselves to sleep, or we were put on a feeding schedule or something where our natural impulses were being immediately from the beginning bleached out of us, we might not even know what it's like to connect to our physiology and our internal system. So start with baby steps. I'll never forget, this just came into my mind. When I was in my Feldenkrais training, and I know someone had a question about Feldenkrais, so I'll get to that, Miyoki. I remember we were learning how to work with the skeleton, because the Feldenkrais method has a lot to do with skeletal structure and knowing how the system moves in space and all that. And we were working with the sit bones, which are these, and you can find them right now if you want. I'm sitting on a stool, so it's easy to find that. But they're the bottom bones of our pelvis. It's where our hamstring muscles attach to, and our hip muscles and all that. And so this person in our class found her sit bones, and as soon as she felt the bone and connected to just that feeling, she immediately felt like she was going to throw up. Now, someone might say, well, that's a bad response. At the time, I hadn't learned any of the stuff that you're learning from me today. Now I know that nausea, a feeling of nausea, is actually a good sign, because it's parts that have been disconnected, have just been connected. She's feeling bone and tissue, and it's a little yucky. It's like, ugh, like just like if you're not used to seeing blood or organs inside of a system. I grew up with that, so it's just second nature to me. There might be a little bit of a, ugh. But we forget that underneath this skin suit of ours is a lot of blood, a lot of chemicals, a lot of bone, a lot of fluid, a lot of fat, a lot of muscle, fascia, tendons, ligaments, all of it. And that disconnection from what's under our skin is one of the reasons why I believe we don't take care of ourselves, because we don't realize what's going on in there. So, true story, had to share it because it came into my mind, and that's how I fly. So, important to enter into connecting with our body in a way that is right for you and that is paced. Now, the reason why I can't give you all these lists right now of specifics is everyone's going to be different. Some of you might have just done that when I suggested, and you're like, oh yeah, that's my sit bones. And someone, just like this woman in my class, you might have done that. You might have had that visceral response that felt a little icky and yucky. That's fine, right? But this is why we have to start slow with these foundations. So, wanted to mention that. Okay, I'm going to go to the questions. So, Miyoki asks, will Feldenkrais help with burnout? So here's the interesting thing. Remember how I was talking about these 5 stages of neuroplastic healing? The 5th one, if you caught it, was neurodifferentiation. The one before that was neurostimulation. Feldenkrais is a very sophisticated, higher brain practice. It's deeply embedded in how we think, how we notice our thoughts, sensing movement, sensing our body, moving through space, investigating, being able to notice when we're tensing. It's a high-level practice. And in my courses, specifically SBSM, so Smart Body, Smart Mind, we don't get into the higher level neuro-differentiated lessons until we've done about 3/4 of the course. And the reason why, and I've seen this enough times to know it to be true, even though it's not double-blinded, placebo-controlled, I've seen it enough times to know it to be true. If someone goes into a Feldenkrais arena, whether it's doing an audio or doing a one-on-one session or a group class, and they don't know how to do the basic feelings of feeling, say, the pelvis on the chair, or feeling their bladder, or being able to reconnect to the environment when they feel a little overwhelmed, if they don't know how to notice their breath and how it might hold when they are doing things, it's not that it can't help. It's not that it can't help. But there is a sequencing that I've seen to this neuroplastic rewiring and healing, again, at this adrenal and biological nervous system level. We need to work first with that neuromodulation and coming out of these fight, flight, freeze responses. The reason why I got into the somatic healing arts and sciences, first studying with Peter Levine and then Kathy Kain, and then of course forming my own way of working with this through their inspiration and teachings. I was in my Feldenkrais practice, very successful at it. It's what helped me recover from a lot of things. But there were quite a few people, I would say 50% of my practice, they were not responding to the Feldenkrais work because they were in so much of that fight, flight, freeze. At the time, I did not know that that's what it was. But that's what it was. They had a somatic disconnection. There was no connection to this interoceptive world. And so they could go through a lesson and a movement, but be doing it, I'm going to go back to Kathy's thing here, through force of will, right? This again, I'll read it again, so important. Without first addressing the underlying survival physiology, any change in behavior is simply overriding through force of will. So you'll see people in a Feldenkrais arena, a situation, doing the movements because they're hearing them from the instructor, but there's no connection to the essence of it. And because this is asking to think about things over and over, if the brain is having trouble processing because it's being bathed in stress chemicals, that is going to hurt someone's head, and they're probably going to think there's something wrong with me and I'm going to give up. So very important to know that. Now, there's ways of doing Feldenkraisian work if we titrate it, if we do a little bit, if we have a practitioner who is trauma informed, who understands these fight, flight, freeze responses. And there are more of us who are starting to learn through the somatic experiencing world, through my work, how to recognize this and break down a lesson so that it is not more overwhelming, but it actually helps to regulate. So it's hard for me to answer the question, will Feldenkrais help with this? It really depends on the person. It helps on it depends on the practitioner, and it also depends on that interaction between those factors and where that person is on the physiological spectrum of fight, flight, freeze. Okay. The next thing I'm going to say here, I'm just going to follow up one more thing before I forget. This concept of neuromodulation. This is us learning how to be masters of our stress physiology. Being able to sense, maybe from today onwards, I just spiked in stress. Maybe you start to notice your system tightening when you hear news that you don't like. Because we take in so much information, whether it's through the media, through our phones, through the world around us, through the people we interact with. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with taking in information. It could even be terrible information. Nothing wrong with it. But if we're not connected to how our physiology is responding to that information, that's where we get into trouble. So part of even learning neuromodulation is listening to when the system goes into a stress response, or noticing when we might get a little numbed out and a little dissociated. That's usually showing us, okay, I'm going into more adrenalized energy. I'm going into more shutdown. I'm going into more activation. And I need to come back to my system, my body. The simplest things can sometimes be just feeling your feet on the ground, feeling your bum on the chair, orienting, something that I teach a lot about in my videos and in my courses, looking around, seeing with our eyes something that is not connected to the information we're taking in. I mean, you can do that right now as I'm talking. So neuromodulation, very important, and it basically is a fancy word for saying getting out of our stress responses and returning and restoring regulation back to the system. I make it sound like this happens in a matter of a week. It doesn't. Depending on the level of where a person is at with their level of adrenal fatigue, how long they have been living in these survival responses, it can take up to 2 or more years to recover the system. Now, don't let that scare you. What that means is that it takes time. It's like learning a new language. We are not going to learn I'm not going to learn fluent German in a matter of 2 weeks. Probably not even 2 years if I'm just doing it here in the world that doesn't speak German. I would need to immerse myself in a German culture, speaking the language, hearing the language, seeing the signs, all that stuff. And so think of this journey of healing adrenal fatigue like you're learning a second language. You're learning a new language, which is to learn how to neuromodulate your system, learn how to find that interoception so that you're not going into more stress reaction. And by doing that, by just doing that, we do build capacity. Now, the other thing I mentioned was neurorelaxation. I'm going to speak to that for a quick moment. One of the things that happens when we start to do this work and we really start to listen to our body, we might realize how damn effing tired we are. And it's going to be hard for the overachievers and the people who do everything for everyone to the expense of their own health. And it is going to feel like death to rest, and to rest more than you think you have to, but feeling this fatigue and letting yourself recover is very important. Now, there's a difference between locking yourself in a room and disconnecting from the world and just staying in a shutdown. We don't want that. But we want to be resting in a conscious, connected way with ourselves and the environment. If we just shut down and turn off and just binge watch every single show on wherever and not feel our bodies, that is not good rest. Hope that makes sense. That is avoiding the healing that can happen when we do rest. So neurorelaxation is a real thing. People who start this work will be amazed at how much time they need, how they have to slow things down. But this doesn't mean that as the system reboots, as those adrenals and kidneys get more juice and they literally start to plump back up. Remember, I talked about the healthy tissue, the healthy organs with lots of blood and robustness and juiciness and vigor. They start to build back up. We start to fill up the tank, so to speak. We start to recoup and repair the cells and the immune system. Once that starts to happen, the energy will come back. But there's a bit of a trust that we have to have, a faith, if you will, that if I'm doing this in a way that's sequenced, as I've been teaching, that is connecting to the body, that's maybe feeling some of the hard, scary stuff that we've trapped in our bodies for so long because we didn't have the ability or wherewithal or the maturity when we were 5 to deal with all the scary stuff that happened to us. I mean, let's be honest, we can't when we're that young. Now, let's say we're 55 and we know we want to fix this and heal this. We're going to feel some stuff that we push down deep in our bodies and in our psyches. This is part of the process, right? So again, those things you see on the internet of, oh, healing adrenal fatigue, it's just eating these foods and meditating and be all, rituals and altars and journals and all those things. Nothing wrong with that stuff. I do a lot of that stuff myself, but we also have to get into the dark side of what was stored in our system so that we can pop it out into the light, and that is how it integrates and heals. So I just again went over neurorelaxation, before that neurostimulation. I was mentioning that question to Mayoki about Feldenkrais. That's a more highly advanced practice. To me, meditation is a highly advanced practice. These basics are where I believe people should start. Let me just go in my mind. Okay, covered a lot, and I know we're past the hour. Let me get to some questions. Let me have a little more tea. Fiona asked, do you think other modalities can potentially compound nervous system regulation? If you mean compound, like compound interest and improve nervous system regulation, 100%. If someone is, what could I choose? In a movement practice, right? An exercise practice where they're learning how to be with their heart rate in intensity and feeling it come down, that's going to improve regulation. If we think of something like a massage or osteopathic manipulations that are more gentle, working with the tissues and being with the body when we're in a session like that, that will build our capacity and improve regulation. Even talk therapy. There's nothing wrong with talk therapy, CBD, as we would cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, I should say, not CBD. There's nothing wrong with a good talk therapy session or a coaching session, but the key is, are you doing it from a somatic perspective and feeling the stuff that comes up as you talk? So all of that, because we have our higher brains, Humans need a multifaceted approach. And like I said, remember my example of the mama bear in Canada versus Russia? Because of our uniqueness, because of our culture, religion, whatever we've been taught and fed when we were young, which maybe wasn't true, right? We have to see lots of different pieces when we're doing our work. Jennifer's question, how do you address the physiology or nervous system when living with a child with complex medical needs that keeps you constantly feeling on because of uncontrolled seizure activity? I definitely feel burnt out after 8 years and want to find ways to regulate. Yeah, that's going to wear you out. So if this is a medical condition that there's no changing, the first thing I'm sure you've gone through all the ringers, but I will say I've seen kiddos with seizures heal because their birth trauma has been healed. So I'm not saying that that's the case for your kiddo, but I hope you've looked into that, because I've worked with some clients who are adults who had seizures and they've gone away, and I know of folks who have worked with kiddos who had severe seizures, and we trace them back. They trace them back to medical interventions and birth trauma and in utero trauma and things that occurred young that got missed, right? So I just wanted to pop that word into there, Jennifer. For you, though, you're going to need to have an escape. You're going to need support. I don't know, obviously, if you have support other than yourself, but you have to find a way to let down and let off steam and ask for help, and be disconnected from that child of yours if you can. Even if it's just a little bit every day, or it's once or 2 times a week. Maybe it's locking yourself in the bathroom when it's safe to do so and they're sleeping, and just having a bath and moving and listening and to your body, lighting candles. I have no idea what it is that you might do that would really nurture you, but you got to find a way to come down. You've also got to find a way to see what kind of anger and rage might be in your system because of the situation you're in. And I'm going to speak really candidly here. You got to take care of your kids, and you love your kids, and they need the help. And it sounds like you're doing that. I've seen parents who haven't allowed themselves to express the frustration and anger and pain and feelings of unfairness because they want to be compassionate and empathetic. You can be compassionate, empathetic, and fully supportive of a child who is in need of more treatment and more care and support, and you still have your animal side who might want to scream and kick and strangle and hit, and you're not going to do that to that child, but you got to get that energy out. I did an article of video. The context is going to be a little different, but it was called, I can't remember, 3 things to do when you want to hit your kids. I'm not implying that that's what you want to do, but I've worked with enough parents to know that frustration is real, and they feel terrible feeling those things, but you got to get that stuff out. So check out that one, and also check out, my husband has a great article titled How to Unfrustrate Frustration. So you got to make sure that you're getting those fight, flight, freeze responses out of your system, because what will happen is you will keep them inside, and then you will start to dissociate and disconnect from your body, and you won't be able to know what your body is telling you. And then it becomes this sort of long process of missing the cues for when you do need self-care and when you do need to relax and rest. So just kind of wanted to tell you how it is. I think it's really important that you're asking this question. So do as much as you can. If you can treat yourself to one of my programs, maybe do that, the 21-day nervous system tune-up, just to give yourself something that is yours, just for you. Or something like an art class or a dance class or a cooking class. You know you best, so make sure you find something that is just for you. Okay, let's see. I haven't had any other questions come in. Let's see. Nora says, how does it look like when something repressed comes up from our psyche? It depends. It could be something that comes out from the body. It could be a memory. It could be a movement. It could be a skin rash. It could be uncontrollable tears. It could be life force energy that doesn't make sense. So it's hard to know because everyone is different. Remember my example about the bears in Canada or Russia? They're pretty simple and pretty basic, you know. They're living the same life on both sides. Whereas as humans, how we store our memories, how we store the bad, scary things that happen to us is it's unique. And this is why, again, if you're new to my work, I'm a little different than a lot of other people in the trauma field. I'm not asking you to try to find the worst ever memory or the best memory. I'm not asking you to try to shake it out. I'm encouraging the building of really strong foundation. Remember what I said at the very beginning about building a house? Foundations that give you the information, the psychoeducation, but also the practice to be in the body, work with your own body so that whatever comes up, no matter how weird or crazy, you're like, oh yeah, this is that thing. Okay, I'm shivering today. Okay, now I've got goosebumps. Oh wow, I just had this weird psychedelic memory of being on another planet, and not questioning it, just going with it and feeling the movements that might want to come out from that. So it's very important to recognize the potential and the possibility when we work from a more base level of building capacity and foundation. I'll talk about that in a second. Jonathan asks, does neuroplastic healing does neuroplastic healing work help people with trauma-related schizophrenia? In my experience, I have not worked with someone directly. However, we know, and I know through the reading, especially through Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and also Gabor Mate's books, most psychiatric illnesses, these guys are saying, are related to early trauma. They're related to, again, this toxic environment where we are having to figure out how to be and live without escaping. Think about, again, if you were here for when I was talking about the tigers in a cage, think about that. You know, if you've ever been to a zoo or if you've seen animals who have been trapped, they don't look well. They're mentally unwell, and they also start getting skin problems and hormonal problems. Their coat doesn't look good. So I believe that neuroplastic healing, when done in the way that I've figured it out from my mentors, my teachers, trial and error, can definitely help with trauma-related mental illness. Everyone's going to be different, but a lot of those older mentors of mine are convinced that most of these disorders, most of these mental disorders, are a result of this nervous system being in complete chaos and dysregulation. So I hope that helps, Jonathan. Just reading your comments, everybody. Thanks for all of them. Hey, Leah. I think you're asking about Tomatis's work. Do you mean the sound work? I know a little bit of it. I don't know enough about it to give you a comparison to my Smart Body, Smart Mind work. I have read the book that he had, and I know that there was a chapter in Norman Doidge's work, I think it was The Brain's Way of Healing, that talks about the Tomatis method, if this is what you're talking about. And I can't speak to it. So I wish I could give you a little bit more information there. You'll have to do some research. Smart Body, Smart Mind, because you're asking how that is in comparison to Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is my 12-week program. I have, and I'm biased, but some of my students can back me up here. It's pretty damn good. There is a comprehensive nature to that program that you will not find in any other online program out there. This does not mean that private one-on-one work, getting a massage session, getting a one-on-one session, doing something else to help facilitate your nervous system healing is not good. But if you can get the foundations and SBSM down, you have got a lot to work with, and it just touches on all the elements. Okay. just reading through here. Jana says, my seizures are definitely intertwined with my childhood traumas. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm not going to get into it today, but there's something called procedural memory. And I just recorded a longer video on that a week ago, so I'll be putting that out in a few weeks. Keep your eye out for that video on procedural memory. I get into a few aspects of medical trauma, procedural memory. But when we are not able to get something out and we have to make ourselves small, it's like putting a cap on a volcano. And sometimes the system isn't going to be able to handle all of that, and then it explodes. And because of our complexity, this is what a lot of my mentors who've been in this work much longer than me are seeing. Tourette's, tics, Parkinson's, seizures, strange movements in the body, stigmata even, things that come out of the system are all, and we can see are all connected in a big way to these traumas that haven't been dealt with. Okay. Okay. So there's a few questions here that people are asking. What is the best way to come out of shutdown, freeze? Where does the healing begin? These are all great questions. So what I would suggest, if you are new here, start with one of my programs. If you want a little taster, and it's just a taster, but it is still a good taster, this Saturday, the 17th of October. So if you're watching this after the fact, you will be able to get this replay. But on Saturday, the 17th of October, I'm doing my monthly drop-in class. It's a 60-minute class. It's a guided neurosensory exercise. I bring you through the basics of orienting, following impulses, connecting to the ground. We're going to be focusing on the heart muscle called the mediastinum on Saturday. I've done this in the past before, so we're going to repeat it, but it'll always be different. So if you want to start with something small, that drop-in class is on Saturday. It's $19, one-time fee. We send you the recording afterwards. You have it forever. So that's one way. And it's not the full enchilada. So if you want to get into the deeper pieces, right now you can start with what's called the 21-day nervous system tune-up. This is a curated self-study starter course that I've curated from my longer 12-week program, Smart Body, Smart Mind. So it gets you warmed up. It gets you the basic information and education, way more than what I've gotten into today. And it gives you practices that are physical, somatic, some movement, some touch, getting into these impulses. So check that out. I would definitely start that if you can. And then starting in the new year, and we actually are probably going to be sending out a note in December. I've got some fun things happening, so be sure to stay tuned. If you're not on my email list, get on my email list. If you haven't done SBSM yet, but we'll start on March 1st, the 10th round of Smart Body, Smart Mind. So this is not a new course that I've just whipped up this year. This has been something that has been developing for many, many years. And it is kind of a full enchilada. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. One of our students is here. Hey, Elizabeth, you wrote, as encouragement to others, I have done SBSM twice, and I am now off thyroid medication. This is a common thing we hear. And Marie says, Irene's 21-day tune-up was so helpful, and I gained so much inner work. So the next one is starting March 1st, but don't wait till then. If you know you want to start doing this work, head over to the 21 days, look, read, get to know it, right? Get to know it, learn, educate yourself. If you want to start these deeper pieces, that's what I suggest. If you can join drop-in this Saturday, I suggest that too. Many of my alumni come back and do drop-in class once a month. It's like a little check-in, a little reminder. Basically, when you join these programs, whether it's 21 days or Smart Body, Smart Mind, you have the content for life. And so as my student just said, Elizabeth it was, you can come back and redo the program each time we run it for as long as we run it. So we have some people in there that have gone through this course 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. And that's this work. This is not a quick fix. It's a lifestyle. It's like brushing our teeth. It's like taking care of our health, our food, our exercise, our relationships. Our nervous system is not something that we just work with for a little bit and then we forget about it. It's always with us. It has always been with us. And up until now, we haven't really focused on it. Focus on the nervous system, as I said at the very beginning. Remember, for those of you who've been hanging out with me for 1 hour and 27 minutes, the autonomic nervous system governs those fight, flight, freeze responses, but it also is responsible for every single physiological system in our body and how we connect with others, how we see things in the world, how we process information. It governs so much of it. So I hope that this has been useful. I hope that there has been some insights that you've learned. If I did not get to all of your questions, head to our Facebook group. I'm recording this on my Facebook page, but the Facebook group, Healthy Nervous System Revolution, it's a private group. You got to answer some questions if you're not in that group so that we know you're real and you're not a bot. Answer the questions, and in there, my team is in there once a week. Jen is one of the main moderators in that group. So if you have a follow-up question, that is the place to ask your question. So this is recorded. This will stay on Facebook. We're going to put it up onto YouTube. We'll definitely send it out to email in a few weeks just to remind you. If you're not on my email list, get on the email list. We don't know how long these social media utilities are going to survive. So I would hate it if you cannot stay in contact with me if for some reason Facebook goes away or Instagram or all these other things. So email is still king and queen. Get on my email list. You just do that by going to my site. It's at the very bottom. You pop in your name. If you join one of my programs, you'll instantly be on my list, so that'll be taken care of. I'm going to stop talking because this has been a lot of talking. I hope you can see how passionate and just really important this work is. This is my work. This is what I do for a living. I have an amazing team who are dedicated to this work. We have seen changes in our own lives. I've seen changes in my team's lives and their kids and all the ripples out. So there you have it. Adrenal fatigue and burnout, all things. Take in the resources, give yourself some time to relax and rest and walk around after this. It's been a lot of information. And that's it for today. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to end the video. Like I said, if you have a question, head over to the Nervous System, Healthy Nervous System Revolution group. Join me for drop-in. Join me for the 21 days. Oh, and one thing, when you do join the 21 days and you want to continue with Smart Body, Smart Mind in the new year, the cost of 21 days is taken off of SBSM. So basically, if you do 21 days now, that is an investment towards SBSM next year. It doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's kind of like a savings account, if you will, for when it comes around again in the year 2021. All right, everyone, lots of love. I'm going to hang up now. We'll see you.